Hey guys, tonight we're talking about why you wouldn't last a single day in a medieval battlefield trench. Picture this, you're lying in a ditch that's barely 3 feet deep, carved into earth so cold and wet it feels like the ground itself is trying to pull you under. Your fingers are numb, wrapped around a pole weapon you barely know how to use. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, enemy soldiers are doing the exact same thing, waiting, shivering, wondering who's going to make the first stupid move at dawn. The smell hits you first. A cocktail of unwashed bodies, horse manure, latrine overflow, and something else you can't quite identify but suspect might be last week's casualties that nobody bothered to bury properly. Welcome to medieval siege warfare, where the glory of battle is actually 90% discomfort, 9% terror, and 1% actual fighting. You probably won't survive this, and honestly, infection will likely kill you long before an enemy sword does. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. I love seeing how this little community spans the globe. Simeon's having breakfast in Tokyo, while someone else is winding down after a long shift in Ohio. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your day begins before sunrise, which in medieval military camps means around 4:30 a.m. during campaign season. There's no alarm clock, obviously just the rough shake of a sergeant-at-arms or the jarring clang of someone beating a cookpot with a ladle. You're sleeping in what could generously be called a shelter, though it's really just a canvas tarp stretched between two poles that does absolutely nothing to keep out the moisture that rises from the ground like a cold, invasive fog. Your bedroll is a thin wool blanket that was probably already crawling with lice when they issued it to you 3 weeks ago. You've been scratching so much that you've got open sores on your ribs, and those sores have started to ooze in a way that probably isn't great, but also isn't immediately life-threatening. So you've just been ignoring it. Medieval military medicine operates on a strict, if you can still walk, you're fine policy. You peel yourself up from the ground, and every joint in your body protests. You're maybe 25 years old, but you feel 50. That's what sleeping on frozen earth does to a person. Your hip bones feel bruised straight through. Your lower back has a permanent ache that shoots down your left leg, and your neck has a crick that makes turning your head to the right an adventure in pain management. Around you, hundreds of other soldiers are going through the same miserable wake-up routine. Someone nearby is coughing that wet, rattling cough that's been making the rounds through camp for the past week. 3 guys in your company have already died from it. They called it camp fever and buried them in a mass grave just beyond the latrine trenches, which seems less than ideal from a sanitation standpoint, but nobody asked for your opinion. The morning assembly is less military precision and more controlled chaos with medieval characteristics. You stumble toward the formation area, trying to remember where you left your gambeson. A gambeson, for those fortunate enough to have never worn one, is a padded jacket stuffed with wool or old linen that serves as your primary armor if you're a common foot soldier. It's supposed to protect you from cuts and absorb the impact of blows. In reality, it's a sweat sponge that holds moisture against your skin and makes you smell like a wet dog that rolled in onions. You find it where you left it, draped over a wagon wheel, still damp from yesterday. It's never actually dry. You've accepted this. You pull it on over your linen undertunic, and immediately feel the clammy fabric press against your chest and back. Delightful. Next comes your belt, from which hangs a eating knife, a small pouch with maybe 3 coins that aren't worth much, and a wooden canteen that still tastes like the sour wine someone filled it with 2 months ago. You're supposed to have more gear, a proper sword, maybe, or at least a decent axe, but those belong to wealthier soldiers. You've got a spear. Well, it's technically a bill hook, which is basically a farm implement that someone welded a spike onto. It's about 8 feet long, unwieldy, and the metal parts are starting to rust because nobody gave you oil to maintain it. This is your primary weapon. This is what stands between you and death. Feel confident yet? The company sergeant is screaming now. Something about formation discipline and keeping your intervals. He's a career soldier, which means he's survived at least 5 campaigns and has the scars to prove it, including a missing ear and a face that looks like it was used as a cutting board. You have no idea how old he is. He could be 35 or 55. Medieval military life ages you like milk left in the sun. He's also one of the few people in this entire army who actually knows what he's doing, which is simultaneously reassuring and terrifying because even he looks nervous about today's plan. The army you're part of is laying siege to a fortified town about 2 miles from your current position. You've been here for 6 weeks. The original plan was to starve them out, but that's taking too long, and your own supplies are running low, which means someone in command has decided it's time to actually assault the walls. This is where trenches come in, though not the kind you're thinking of. You're not digging the elaborate trench systems of World War I, with their dugouts and communication trenches and sandbag walls. Medieval siege trenches are approach trenches, basically ditches you dig progressively closer to enemy walls while they shoot arrows and drop rocks on you. It's less tactical warfare and more suicidal landscaping. Breakfast is a chunk of dark bread that's been sitting in a supply wagon so long it's taken on the texture of wood, plus a ladle of potagia watery stew made from whatever grain was cheapest, with maybe a hint of turnip if you're lucky. You eat it standing up, using your fingers because you don't have a spoon and wouldn't want to carry one anyway. The bread is so hard you have to dip it in the pottage just to make it chewable. Around you, soldiers are complaining in at least 4 different languages. This army is a contractor's mix some local levies who got pressed into service. Some mercenaries from Germany, a company of Flemish crossbowmen who keep to themselves, and a bunch of English longbowmen who won't shut up about Cressy even though that was decades ago and nobody cares anymore. Historians still argue whether medieval armies were genuinely multinational fighting forces or just loose coalitions held together by pay and plunder. The evidence suggests it's mostly the latter. You're not fighting for your homeland or your faith here because your lord said you had to be, or because you needed the money, or because military service was literally the only employment option that didn't involve starving in a ditch somewhere. There's no grand patriotic fervor. There's just the next meal and the hope that you'll live long enough to go home. The march to the siege line takes about an hour, and it's during this march that you realize just how unprepared you are for the physical demands of medieval warfare. You're carrying your bill hook, which weighs maybe 10 pounds and is awkward to balance while walking. You've got your gambeson, which is now starting to heat up as the sun rises. You've got a small pack with your blanket roll and your spare shirt, which is really just your current shirt but older. And you're walking on a road that's been churned into soup by thousands of feet, hooves, and wagon wheels over the past 6 weeks. Your boots, and let's be generous and call them boots, are leather ankle wraps that you've stuffed with straw for insulation. They're falling apart. The stitching on the left one has come undone, and you've been trying to hold it together with a strip of cloth tied around your ankle, but that's not really working. Your feet are constantly wet. There's a blister on your right heel that's probably infected. You've stopped noticing the pain because the pain is just part of existence now. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen ancient Egyptians supposedly used? Well, medieval soldiers don't have sunscreen at all. And if they did, it would probably be made from something equally revolting. Your face is already sunburned from weeks of outdoor living, and it's starting to peel in a way that makes you look like a molting lizard. Someone told you that rubbing tallow on your face helps, so now you smell like rendered animal fat in addition to everything else. You're a sensory nightmare. The siege works come into view as you crest a small rise. The town walls loom a head-gray stone, maybe 30 feet high, with crenellations at the top where defenders can shoot down at you with relative safety. Between your current position and those walls is about 200 yards of open ground that someone has optimistically tried to cover with approach trenches. These trenches zigzag toward the walls in a pattern that's supposed to minimize your exposure to enemy fire. They're about 4 feet deep and 3 feet wide, just enough for a man to crouch in while moving forward. The earthworks are reinforced with wicker screens called gabions, which are baskets filled with dirt and rocks. They're supposed to stop arrows. They do not reliably stop arrows. Your company is being assigned to trench digging duty, which means you'll spend the next 8 to 10 hours extending the approach trench another 30 feet closer to the walls while enemy archers try to turn you into a pincushion. You're handed a shovel, actual iron shovel, which is somewhat better than the wooden spades some companies get, and told to get to work. This is where the reality of medieval siege warfare really hits you. It's manual labor. Backbreaking, miserable, dangerous manual labor. You climb down into the existing trench, and immediately you're knee-deep in muddy water that's accumulated at the bottom. The walls are slick with moisture and starting to collapse in places. There are wooden boards laid across the worst of the puddles, but they're slimy with algae and you nearly slip twice just getting into position. The plan is simple. Dig forward, throw the dirt onto the gabions to build them higher. Try not to die. You start digging, and within 10 minutes your back is screaming. The earth here is clay heavy, which means every shovelful weighs approximately 900 pounds and sticks to the shovel like it's personally offended by your attempt to move it. You develop a rhythm, drive the shovel in, lever up a chunk of mud, twist, throw it toward the gabion, repeat, drive, lever, twist, throw. Your hands are already blistering. The wooden shovel handle is rough and unfinished, and you can feel splinters working their way into your palms. Above you, arrows occasionally whisper overhead. The defenders aren't in range for accurate shooting yet, but they're trying anyway, harassing fire meant to slow you down and make you nervous. It's working. Every time you hear that distinctive flutter of fletching through air, you flinch and try to make yourself smaller. A guy 3 positions down from you gets hit in the shoulder. The arrow punches straight through his gambeson and he goes down screaming. 2 stretcher bearers haul him out of the trench. You never see him again. Probability suggests he died of infection within a week, even if the wound itself wasn't fatal. You dig. The sun climbs higher. It's probably mid-morning now, and the temperature is rising. Your gambeson has gone from clammy to sweat-soaked. You can feel moisture running down your spine, pooling at the small of your back. Your hair is plastered to your forehead. Someone passes a water skin down the line, and you take a grateful swig. The water tastes like leather and has small particles floating in it that you try not to think about. You're supposed to ration water, but you're so thirsty you take an extra gulp before passing it on. The sergeant sees you and curses, but doesn't actually do anything about it. He's got bigger problems. By noon, you've moved maybe 6 feet forward. 6 feet closer to walls bristling with armed men who want you dead. 6 feet that cost you hours of labor and 1 casualty. This is medieval siege warfare. Slow, grinding, and utterly unglamorous. There are no heroic charges, no noble combat, just mud, fear, and the growing certainty that you've made a terrible mistake volunteering for this. Your hands are bleeding now, the blisters have popped, and the rough shovel handle is working directly on raw skin. You try wrapping them with strips torn from your spare shirt, but it doesn't help much. Every movement sends sharp jolts of pain through your palms. You keep digging anyway, because stopping means getting yelled at or worse. The medieval military doesn't really do sympathy, and this is just the beginning. You haven't even gotten to the actual fighting yet. You haven't experienced the real terrors of medieval combat, the crush of bodies, the screaming, the blood-slick ground that makes footing impossible. This is just the warm-up, the appetizer before the main course of horror. Welcome to your day in a medieval battlefield trench. You're cold, wet, exhausted, injured, and the enemy hasn't even really started trying to kill you yet. And somehow, improbably, you still have to survive the next 16 hours before you can collapse in your lice-ridden bedroll and do it all again tomorrow. Sweet dreams. The trench you're standing in barely deserves the name. When most people hear battlefield trench, they picture something from Flanders in 1916, elaborate networks of dugouts with wooden support beams, communication trenches, fire steps, even little alcoves for storing ammunition and sleeping. Forget all of that. Medieval trenches are essentially ditches that angry, exhausted men have scraped into the earth with whatever tools they could find. The one you're currently occupying is maybe 4 feet deep at its deepest point, though it varies wildly because nobody bothered with standardized measurements. Medieval military engineering operates on vibes and rough estimates. The walls aren't supported by anything except hope and whatever clay content happens to be in the local soil. You can see roots sticking out at eye level, and there are places where the walls have already started to slump and cave in, narrowing the trench to barely shoulder width. When it rains, and it will rain, because this is medieval Europe and it always rains, these trenches transform into canals. You'll be standing in water up to your knees, trying to do military activities while essentially wading through a cold, muddy stream that smells like a sewer, because, plot twist, it basically is a sewer. Let's talk about sanitation, or rather the complete absence of it. You've been working in this trench for 6 hours now, and your bladder is screaming. There are no bathroom breaks. There's no designated latrine area nearby. You know what there is? The trench itself. When you need to urinate, you just do it. Right there. Either you edge to a corner and try to be discreet about it, or if things are really desperate, you just turn away from your companions and go. Everyone does it. The bottom of the trench has a permanent golden tint to the water that's accumulating there, and it's not from minerals in the soil. If you catch my meaning, the smell is indescribable. Imagine wet dog, times 10, mixed with public urinal, times 20, with top notes of rotting vegetation and unwashed human bodies that haven't bathed properly in months. Add in the metallic tang of fierce weddies. Terror has its own distinct odor, and you're starting to approach the olfactory nightmare that is a medieval siege trench. Your nose adjusts after the first hour or so, but it never fully adapts. The smell is always there, lurking at the edge of your awareness, a constant reminder that you're living in conditions that would make a medieval peasant's pig pen look hygienic by comparison. The actual construction of these trenches reveals just how unprepared medieval armies were for prolonged siege operations. You're not working with professional military engineers who studied fortification design at some medieval West Point. You're working under the supervision of a master carpenter who usually builds barns, and he's making it up as he goes along. The trench zigzags toward the enemy walls in a pattern that's supposed to prevent defenders from shooting straight down the line, but the angles are inconsistent. Some sections curve gradually, others turn at sharp right angles that create bottlenecks where soldiers bunch up and become easy targets. The soil composition varies dramatically along the trench line. In some sections, you're digging through loose, sandy earth that's easy to move but collapses constantly, requiring you to shore it up with whatever materials you can scavenge: branches, old doors ripped from abandoned buildings, broken wagon wheels. In other sections, you hit clay so dense and heavy that every shovelful feels like you're trying to excavate concrete. And then there are the sections where you hit rock, just solid bedrock, 2 feet down, and nobody in command wants to hear about how you can't dig through stone with a wooden shovel. The solution: dig around it. Make the trench shallower in those sections and hope the defenders don't notice that your head is now fully exposed above ground level. Now let's talk about the wildlife situation in excruciating detail, because the rats are only the beginning. You're not alone in this trench. Not by a long shot. Rats are everywhere: big, bold medieval rats that have figured out that military camps are all-you-can-eat buffets. They don't even run when you move anymore. They just sort of waddle aside, giving you the rat equivalent of a contemptuous glare before going back to whatever rotting scrap they were gnawing on. You watched one drag off someone's dropped bread heel earlier, and the rat won that tug-of-war decisively. These aren't the skittish little field mice you might find cute in some Disney fantasy. These are war rats, hardened by survival, bloated on corpse meat and discarded food, and they're absolutely fearless. At night, which you'll experience soon enough, the rats get bolder. They'll crawl right over you while you're trying to sleep. You'll feel their little clawed feet on your legs, your chest, sometimes your face. The first few times this happens, you'll jolt awake in panic. By the 10th time, you'll barely stir. You'll just brush them off like they're particularly large, mobile insects and try to drift back into whatever fitful sleep you were managing. One soldier in your company woke up with a rat bite on his ear last week. The wound got infected, of course it did, and now half his face is swollen and he's developed a fever that makes him shake and mutter nonsense during formation. He's still expected to work. By the way, medieval military discipline waits for no man's rat-induced infection. But wait, there's more. Where there are rats, there are fleas. And medieval fleas are essentially tiny vampires with jumping abilities that would make an Olympic athlete jealous. They're everywhere: in your clothes, in your hair, in the seams of your gambeson. You can feel them biting constantly, little sharp pinpricks that make you itch with an intensity that borders on madness. You scratch until you bleed, creating open wounds that then become infected because your fingernails are caked with dirt, and worse. The itching never stops. It becomes the soundtrack to your existence. This constant need to scratch, to dig your fingernails into your skin and rake them across your flesh just to get a moment of relief. Then there are the flies. Oh Lord, the flies. They're attracted by the smell of human waste, rotting food, and the general miasma of decay that hangs over siege lines like a physical presence. They land on your face, crawl into your ears, buzz around your mouth when you're trying to eat. You can't swat them away because your hands are busy holding a shovel or a weapon. You just have to endure their tiny legs tickling across your skin, knowing that those same flies were probably crawling on something truly revolting just moments before. There are bluebottle flies that are iridescent green and seem to specialize in finding woundsteel land on that infected blister on your hand or that scratch on your neck and just sit there, probing with whatever mouthparts flies have, possibly laying eggs. You try not to think about the maggots. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers understood disease transmission, but the consensus is that they had some vague notion that bad air caused illness without understanding the mechanism. They called it miasma theory, the idea that diseases came from foul-smelling air rising from swamps, corpses, and general filth. They weren't wrong that all those things were associated with disease. They just didn't understand that it was the organisms living in those environments rather than the smell itself that was the problem. They definitely didn't understand that flies walking from corpses to food to your mouth was an express highway for every intestinal parasite imaginable. Speaking of parasites, let's discuss what's happening inside your body right now. You've been drinking water from questionable sources for weeks. You've been eating food prepared in conditions that would give a modern health inspector a heart attack. Your intestines are now home to a thriving ecosystem of worms, protozoans, and bacteria that are having the time of their lives while your body tries desperately to expel them. You have diarrhea at least once a day, sometimes more. It's watery, painful, and leaves you weak and dehydrated. But you can't take time off to recover. You can't lie down and rest. You just have to clench your teeth, ignore the cramping in your guts, and keep working. The water situation in these trenches deserves its own detailed discussion. Remember how I mentioned that water accumulates at the bottom? That's not fresh spring water. It's a toxic cocktail of rainwater, urine, dissolved feces from the latrine runoff uphill, and whatever chemicals are leaching from the disturbed soil. The water has a brownish tint and a smell that makes you gag when you first notice it. Small bubbles occasionally rise to the surface, suggesting that something is decomposing down there in the mud. You don't want to think about what, but you're thirsty. You're always thirsty because you're doing hard manual labor in armor that makes you sweat like you're in a sauna. Your mouth is constantly dry, your lips are cracked, and your throat feels like sandpaper. The water rations come around maybe 3 times a day if you're lucky, and they're never enough. The water skin gets passed down the line, and by the time it reaches you, there's maybe a mouthful left. You tip it back, squeeze every last drop into your mouth, and it's never enough. You're still thirsty, always thirsty, and sometimes, when the water rations don't come around fast enough, you're going to be tempted to scoop up a handful of that trench water and drink it. Don't do it. Seriously, don't. But people do. You've seen guys do it. They get so desperately thirsty that they convince themselves it's fine, that if they just drink from a spot where the water looks clearer, it'll be okay. That boiling it later will help even though there's no way to boil water in a frontline trench. Then they spend the next 3 days experiencing dysentery so violent it's basically a religious experience. They lose 10 pounds in water weight, become so dehydrated their lips crack and bleed, their eyes sink into their skulls, and sometimes they just die. Medieval battlefield dysentery probably killed more soldiers than actual combat did. And this is how you get it drinking water that's been contaminated by the collective output of an army's digestive systems. Your feet are rotting. Not metaphorically, literally rotting. They've been wet for days on end, sealed inside those leather foot wraps, never drying out. The skin between your toes has gone pale and wrinkled like you've been in a bath too long, but instead of returning to normal when it dries, it started to split. Deep cracks that ooze clear fluid and sting with every step. There's a distinctive smell coming from your boots that's separate from all the other smells, A sweet-sour rot that makes you gag when you first notice it. This is trench foot, though it won't be called that for another several centuries. Medieval soldiers called it camp foot or just the rot, and it could get bad enough that your toes would literally fall off. You've heard stories about guys who took off their boots after a long campaign and their toenails came with the leather, still embedded in the material where they'd been pressed for weeks. The cold is another dimension of misery that modern people really can't appreciate. We're talking about a time before proper insulation, before waterproof materials, before the concept of moisture-wicking fabric. You're wearing natural fibers linen and wool primarily that absorb water like sponges and then hold it against your skin. Wool stays somewhat warm even when wet, which is its one redeeming quality, but it also gets incredibly heavy. Your gambeson probably weighs twice as much now as it did dry, and all that weight is pulling on your shoulders, making your neck ache and your posture slouch forward like you're 80 years old. When the sun goes down and it's starting to sink toward the horizon now, casting long shadows across the battlefield, the temperature drops fast. Medieval Europe doesn't mess around with gentle temperature transitions. One moment you're sweating in the afternoon sun, the next you're shivering as the cold settles in like an unwelcome guest. You don't have a coat hats for rich people. You've got your gambeson, your thin linen shirt underneath, and that's it. You'll spend the night shivering so hard your teeth chatter, trying to curl into the smallest possible ball to conserve body heat, knowing that the ground is leaching warmth from you with every passing minute. Medieval soldiers didn't understand hypothermia as a medical concept, but they definitely understood that enough cold nights could kill you just as dead as an arrow. They called it the shakes or cold death, and they knew that once a man got cold enough, once he stopped shivering and started getting sleepy and confused, was probably done for. You'd find him in the morning, curled in a ball, skin blue-gray, frost in his beard, and nobody would be particularly surprised. Just another casualty of the siege, another body to be stripped of anything useful and thrown in the burial pit. Let's talk about the structural integrity of these trenches, or the lack thereof. You're basically standing in an open wound in the earth, held together by nothing except the soil's natural cohesion and increasingly desperate prayers. When it rains, and it's starting to rain now, actually, just a light drizzle, but you know from experience that it's picking up, the walls turn into slippery mudslides. Chunks of earth slew off and fall into the bottom of the trench, which is now filling with water at an alarming rate. The rain is cold. Not refreshing summer rain, but the kind of bone-chilling drizzle that seems to seep directly into your marrow. It runs down the back of your neck, finds every gap in your clothing, and within minutes you're soaked through. The water in the trench bottom is ankle-deep now, then shin-deep. You try to keep working because the sergeant is screaming something about maintaining the work schedule, but you're basically digging in a swimming pool at this point. Every shovelful of earth you remove is immediately replaced by mud sliding down from the walls. Someone screams down the line. You look over and see that a section of trench wall has collapsed completely, burying 2 soldiers up to their waists in mud. The weight of wet earth is incredible. It's not like being buried in sand at the beach where you can just wiggle free. This is heavy, suffocating clay that grips like a vice. Everyone drops their tools and rushes to dig them out before they suffocate or drown. Yes, you can drown in mud. And yes, this is horrifying as it sounds. You're clawing at the wet earth with your bare hands now, ignoring the pain from your blisters that have torn open and are bleeding freely. The mud is cold and slimy, and it keeps sliding back into the hole you're trying to create. You're digging frantically, trying to free your fellow soldiers before the weight of the mud crushes their chests and stops them from breathing. One of them is crying, gasping out prayers in a language you don't recognize. The other one has gone silent, which is somehow worse. You get them out, eventually, but it takes 10 minutes of panic digging and both of them are in shock, gasping and crying, covered head to toe in brown sludge. One of them vomits immediately, bringing up thin bile and probably whatever breakfast he managed to choke down 8 hours ago. The other just sits there shaking, eyes wide and unfocused, making small whimpering sounds. The sergeant calls a halt to the digging. Even he can see that continuing in these conditions is suicide. You're ordered to hold position in the trench until the rain stops. Hold position. In a flooding ditch. In the rain. With walls that are actively collapsing. This is your life now. This is what glory looks like. You huddle against the least collapsed section of trench wall, trying to use your body to shield your face from the rain. It doesn't work. Water runs down your neck, soaks through your gambeson, finds every gap in your clothing and exploits it mercilessly. You're shivering violently now, your teeth chattering so hard you're worried you might chip one. Your jaw aches from clenching. Around you, other soldiers are in similar states of misery. Someone is praying quietly in German, the same phrase over and over. Another guy is just staring at the wall, expression blank, completely checked out mentally. You don't blame him. Dissociation is a reasonable response to this. Here's a fun, quirky fact that medieval soldiers would have known. If you're stuck in a wet trench and desperate for warmth, you can huddle together with other soldiers for shared body heat. This wasn't considered weird or intimate, it was pure survival. You'd press against the person next to you, sharing whatever meager warmth your bodies could generate, trying to create a tiny pocket of slightly less freezing air between you. It's awkward at first, especially given that everyone smells like they've been marinating in a medieval toilet for 6 weeks. But desperation overcomes embarrassment pretty quickly. You end up pressed against a guy named Willem who doesn't speak your language. But neither of you care because his body is warm and yours is warm, and together you're slightly less likely to die of exposure. The rain continues for 3 hours. 3 endless hours of standing in gradually rising water, shivering, miserable, watching the light fade from the sky and wondering if this is how you die, not gloriously in combat, not even quickly from an arrow or sword, but slowly from exposure in a muddy ditch while the enemy watches from their nice dry walls and probably laughs. When the rain finally stops, the water in the trench is knee-deep and the bottom has become a sucking mud pit that grabs at your boots every time you try to move. Climbing out of the trench requires help. You have to grab someone's hand while another person pushes from below, and even then you nearly lose a boot to the suction. The mud makes obscene squelching sounds as it releases your foot, and when you finally haul yourself up and over the edge, you lie on the ground for a moment, gasping, covered in filth, wondering how many more days of this you can possibly endure. The day isn't over. By the way, it's only mid-afternoon, though the rain has made it darker. You're soaked, freezing, exhausted, and you still have 4 more hours of duty before they'll let you return to camp. 4 more hours of standing in this medieval nightmare trench, pretending to be a functional soldier while your body screams that it's shutting down from cold and fatigue and general misery. Welcome to the reality of medieval siege trenches. No glory, no honor, just mud, rats, disease, and the growing certainty that whoever wrote those romantic tales about chivalry and warfare had never spent a single day in conditions like this. You've survived the trench work. somehow, and now you're trudging back to camp as the sun sets. Your legs feel like lead weights, your hands are ruined, and you're so cold that you've stopped shivering, which is actually a bad sign, but you're too exhausted to care. You're fantasizing about warmth, about food, about maybe getting your boots off for 5 minutes and letting your feet breathe. But here's the thing about medieval military camps. They're not sanctuaries of comfort. They're just different versions of hell. As you collapse onto your bedroll still damp from last night. By the way, because nothing ever dries in this climate, you notice that your stomach is making ominous gurgling sounds. That churning, uneasy feeling that tells you something is deeply wrong with your digestive system. You try to ignore it. You try to tell yourself it's just hunger, just fatigue. But deep down, you know the truth, you've caught something. Maybe it was the water you drank from that questionable barrel 3 days ago. Maybe it was the food, that pottage that tasted slightly off but you were too hungry to care. Maybe it was just the general conditions of living in close quarters with hundreds of unwashed humans and their accumulated filth. The cramps start around midnight. Sharp, twisting pains in your lower abdomen that make you curl into a ball and bite down on your blanket to keep from crying out. Then comes the urgent need to evacuate your bowels, and you have to stumble through the dark camp to the latrine trenches, which are exactly what they sound like. Long ditches where men squat shoulder to shoulder and contribute to a river of human waste that flows downhill into, well, nobody really knows where it goes. Into the nearby stream, probably. The same stream that supplies drinking water to villages downstream. But that's their problem, not yours. You make it to the latrine and spend the next hour in a state of explosive misery that would be embarrassing if everyone else wasn't going through the same thing. Dysentery has hit your section of camp hard. It's the medieval military's most reliable killer, more effective than enemy action by a significant margin. The Romans understood the importance of sanitation. They built aqueducts and sophisticated sewer systems. Medieval military commanders apparently missed that particular history lesson and just shrugged at the concept of waste management. Here's what dysentery does to your body. It inflames your intestines, causing severe diarrhea that's often bloody and always painful. You lose water at an alarming rate, becoming dehydrated so quickly that your lips crack. Your skin loses its elasticity, and your eyes sink into your skull. You become weak, dizzy, unable to stand without help. And the truly fun part? The treatment options available to medieval soldiers are worse than useless theory, actively harmful. The camp physician, and I use that term loosely because his medical training consisted of watching another guy do medicine for a few months, has a solution: bloodletting. See, medieval medical theory operates on the concept of bodily humors. You've got 4 of them: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and when they're out of balance, you get sick. The obvious solution is to drain some blood out, which will somehow rebalance everything. This makes absolutely no sense, but it's been standard medical practice for centuries, so it must work, right? The physician opens a vein in your arm with a small knife that's been used on dozens of other patients and never properly cleaned. You watch your blood drip into a wooden bowl while he mutters something about evil humors and corrupted blood. You're already dehydrated from dysentery, and now he's removing the fluid your body desperately needs to survive. Historians still argue whether medieval physicians did more harm than good, but in cases like this, the answer is pretty clearly harm. You stumble away from the bloodletting session feeling weaker than before, and you still have dysentery. Let's talk about medieval hygiene, or the complete absence thereof. You haven't bathed in 6 weeks. Not a proper bath. Anyway, maybe you've splashed some water on your face occasionally, But a full body wash? Absolutely not. There are no facilities for it, no time for it, and honestly, the idea of getting naked in a military camp where theft is rampant and privacy is non-existent doesn't appeal anyway. So you're wearing clothes that haven't been washed in weeks, clothes that are stiff with dried sweat and other substances you don't want to identify. Your hair is matted and greasy, possibly housing a small ecosystem of lice and their eggs. The lice deserve special mention because they're constant companions. Head lice, body lice, pubic lice. UVE got the complete collection. They bite constantly, creating a low-grade itching that never stops. You scratch until you bleed, creating little wounds that then get infected because your fingernails are caked with dirt and bacteria. Some guys in camp have taken to sitting by the fire in the evening, running the seams of their shirts through the flames to kill the lice eggs. It doesn't work, the lice always come back, but it gives them something to do with their hands and the illusion of control over their situation. Your teeth are rotting. Medieval dental hygiene is basically non-existent, and the diet of hard bread and whatever gritty food the army supplies is grinding your teeth down while simultaneously allowing cavities to flourish. You've got a molar that's been aching for 2 weeks now, a deep throbbing pain that shoots through your jaw every time you bite down on something. There's no dentist in camp. The solution, if it gets bad enough, is to have someone pull it out with pliers. No anesthetic, obviously, just a leather strap to bite down on while some burly blacksmith uses his metalworking tools on your face. Let's discuss disease transmission in a medieval military camp, because it's basically a perfect storm of every pathogen's dream scenario. You've got thousands of men living in close quarters, sharing everything from water sources to eating utensils to sleeping spaces. There's no concept of quarantine, no understanding of how diseases spread beyond that vague bad air theory. When someone gets sick, they just keep living in close proximity to everyone else, coughing and sneezing and shedding pathogens everywhere. Typhus is making the rounds through camp. It starts with a high fever, followed by a rash that spreads across your body, along with severe headaches and muscle pain. It's spread by lice. Remember those constant companions I mentioned? And in the cramped, filthy conditions of a military camp, it spreads like wildfire. You watch men go from healthy to delirious in the span of 3 days. They lie in their bedrolls, shaking with fever, muttering nonsense, occasionally screaming. Some of them recover. Most don't. The bodies are dragged out each morning and added to the burial pit. There's also something going around that causes violent vomiting and fever, probably some form of food poisoning or contaminated water, but nobody knows for sure. Men are collapsing during formation, doubled over and retching. The smell of vomit has joined the general bouquet of camp odors. You try to avoid the worst affected sections of camp, but in a crowded military encampment, there's nowhere to go that isn't contaminated with something. Your immune system is completely overwhelmed. In normal circumstances, your body might be able to fight off one infection at a time, but you're malnourished, sleep-deprived, stressed, injured, and exposed to multiple pathogens simultaneously. Your body is essentially fighting a multi-front war against diseases while also trying to heal your blistered hands, your infected scratches, your rotting feet, and maintain basic functions like keeping your heart beating and your lungs working. Something's got to give. The food situation compounds all your health problems. The army is supposed to receive regular supply trains, but the logistics of medieval warfare are a nightmare. Roads are terrible muddy tracks that become impassable in rain. Wagons break down constantly. Supplies get stolen or spoil before they reach their destination. What actually makes it to camp is often in questionable condition. The grain has weevils in it. The salted meat has started to turn despite the salt. The cheese is more mold than cheese at this point, but you scrape off the worst of it and eat it anyway because you're starving. You're not getting enough calories for the amount of physical labor you're doing. A modern nutritionist would calculate that someone doing the kind of intense manual work you're doing needs maybe 500 to 4,000 calories per day. You're probably getting 500 if you're lucky. Your body is beginning to consume itself, breaking down muscle tissue for energy. You can feel yourself getting weaker day by day. Your arms tremble when you lift your weapon. Your legs shake after climbing out of trenches. The vitamin deficiency diseases are starting to appear in camp. Scurvy is showing up among men who've been on campaign for more than a couple of months without fresh food. Their gums are bleeding and swollen. Their teeth are loosening in their sockets. Old wounds are reopening. There's no understanding of vitamins in medieval medicine. They just know that fresh food somehow prevents this mysterious illness. But fresh food is in short supply during siege operations. Let's talk about wounds and infection, because even minor injuries become life-threatening in these conditions. Remember those blisters on your hands from the shovel? They're infected now. Red, swollen, oozing pus that has an unpleasant smell. You tried washing them in water from the camp barrel, but that water isn't clean. It's contaminated with bacteria from the unwashed hands of hundreds of other soldiers. So instead of helping, you've just introduced more pathogens into the wounds. There's a cut on your shin from where you scraped it against a rough piece of wood 3 days ago. It's not a serious cut, just a scrape, really, but it's not healing. Instead, the skin around it has become red and hot to the touch. There are red streaks running up your leg from the wound site. You don't know it, but that's lymphangitis, a sign that the infection is spreading through your lymphatic system. If it reaches your bloodstream, you'll develop sepsis and probably die. But you don't know any of this. You just know your leg hurts and you feel feverish and weak. The camp has no antibiotics. Obviously, penicillin won't be discovered for another 6 centuries. The treatment for infected wounds is to apply poultices made from various herbs, some of which might actually have mild antibacterial properties, most of which do nothing and hope for the best. Some physicians swear by applying honey to wounds, which actually isn't a bad idea since honey has natural antimicrobial properties. Others prefer to pack wounds with moss or spider webs, which is significantly less helpful. If an infection gets really bad, the solution is amputation. Just cut off the infected part before it spreads and kills the whole person. This is done with saws and knives, without anesthesia, and the survival rate is abysmal. Not from the amputation itself. Medieval surgeons were actually fairly skilled at chopping off limbs quickly, but from the shock, blood loss, and inevitable infection of the amputation site. You watch a man get his arm sawn off after a wound turned gangrenous. He screams until his voice gives out, then just makes horrible gasping sounds while 4 other soldiers hold him down. He dies 2 days later from fever, and nobody is surprised. Respiratory infections are everywhere in camp. The combination of cold, damp conditions, poor nutrition, and close quarters means everyone has some kind of cough or congestion. You wake up each morning and spend 10 minutes coughing up phlegm-thick, greenish stuff that you spit onto the ground where it joins everyone else's expectorations. Some men are coughing up blood, which is a particularly bad sign that probably means tuberculosis or pneumonia. They keep working anyway because there's no such thing as sick leave in a medieval army. Here's a quirky historical detail. Medieval soldiers sometimes tried to prevent illness by carrying around protective amulets or relics. A saint's finger bones, a scrap of cloth that supposedly touched a holy artifact, a prayer written on parchment and sewn into their clothing. These did absolutely nothing to prevent disease, obviously, but they provided psychological comfort. The placebo effect is real, even if the protection isn't. You've got a cheap wooden cross hanging around your neck that a priest blessed before you marched out. You touch it occasionally and mutter prayers, hoping it might help. It won't, but hope is one of the few things you have left. The mental toll of constant illness is crushing. You're in pain all the time, your stomach hurts, your head aches, your wounds throb, your muscles are sore, your feet are agony. You're exhausted but can't sleep properly because you're either too cold, too uncomfortable, or too worried about rats crawling on you. Your brain feels foggy, like you're thinking through thick wool. You make stupid mistakes because you're too tired and sick to focus. You forget simple things. You stand there holding your spear and realize you've been staring into space for 5 minutes and have no idea what's happening around you. The psychological impact of watching people die from disease is different from watching them die in combat. In battle, death at least feels purposeful, even if that purpose is questionable. But dying from dysentery in a muddy camp? That's just pathetic. It's meaningless. You watch men waste away over the course of a week, becoming skeletal and weak, soiling themselves because they can't control their bowels anymore, and then they're gone, dragged out of the tent and thrown in a pit. Their belongings are immediately claimed by others. Nothing goes to waste in a military camp. Their bedroll becomes someone else's bedroll. Their spare shirt gets traded for food. It's like they never existed. You're starting to wonder if you'll be next. That constant low-grade fear that every ache, every pain, every upset stomach is the beginning of something fatal. You can't shake the feeling that your body is slowly giving up, that the cumulative effects of cold, hunger, exhaustion, and disease are wearing you down to nothing. You're probably right to worry. Medieval military campaigns had mortality rates that would be shocking by modern standards, not from battle, but from disease and exposure. Armies would set out with 10,000 men and return with 6,000, and most of those losses were from sickness, not combat. And the worst part? You're not even close to going home. The siege could last months. You could be living in these conditions until winter, assuming you survive that long. Every day is just trying to make it to the next day, trying to stay healthy enough to keep functioning, trying not to think about the fact that your body is slowly breaking down and there's nothing you can do about it. Welcome to medieval military medicine, where the diseases are plentiful, the treatments are useless or harmful, and your chances of dying from something invisible are significantly higher than your chances of dying heroically in combat. Sweet dreams indeed. Morning comes again, it always does. Unfortunately, and you're being roused for another day of military activities. Except today, instead of digging, you're being issued actual combat equipment. This means someone in command has decided it's time to stop playing in the mud and actually assault the walls. Your stomach drops. You've heard the stories. You've seen the casualties being carried back from previous assault attempts. This is the part where the dying shifts from slow and disease-related to fast and violent. The equipment distribution is chaotic and fundamentally unfair. If you were a knight or a man-at-arms Samion with money and status, you'd have a full suit of plate armor, proper sword, maybe a destrier warhorse worth more than a peasant's house. But you're not. You're a common foot soldier, which means you get whatever's left over after the important people have taken their pick. You already have your gambeson, which is still damp and smells like a locker room designed by Satan. Now they're adding to your ensemble. First comes a helmet. Not a magnificent great helm with a plumed crest, but a simple kettle hat, basically a wide-brimmed metal bowl that sits on your head and provides minimal protection. It's made of cheap iron, already rusting in spots, and it doesn't fit properly. It's too large, which means it shifts around when you move your head, and the inner padding, which is supposed to cushion impacts, is basically non-existent. Just a thin strip of leather that does nothing to prevent the metal from pressing directly against your skull. When you move, the helmet makes a slight rattling sound. This is not confidence-inspiring. Next, if you're lucky, you might get a piece of mail. Not a full hauberk, those are expensive, but maybe a coif that covers your neck and shoulders, or a short mail shirt that reaches to mid-thigh. The mail is heavy. Each individual ring weighs almost nothing, but when you weave thousands of them together into a garment, the weight adds up fast. A full mail hauberk weighs about 30 pounds, and that weight is distributed across your shoulders and back. The short shirt you're issued probably weighs 20 pounds, and within minutes of putting it on, you can feel it pulling at your shoulders, making your neck ache. The mail is also not in great condition. Some of the rings are broken or missing, leaving gaps in the protection. Some sections are so rusted that you're not sure they'd actually stop a weapon. The metal might just crumble on impact. And here's a fun detail about mail armor. It doesn't actually stop piercing weapons very effectively. An arrow or a spear thrust can punch right through the rings, especially if the mail is cheap or poorly maintained. What mail is good at is preventing cuts from slashing weapons. Against a sword swing, it's decent protection. Against a bodkin arrow shot from a powerful longbow, you might as well be wearing a decorative metal sweater. Now comes the weapon distribution, and this is where things get really interesting. The weapons available to common soldiers are agricultural tools that have been weaponized, and the quality is variable. You're handed a billhook, that same farm implement you were carrying before, used normally for pruning trees and cutting hedges. Someone has attached a metal spike to the back of the blade, transforming it from a gardening tool into something theoretically capable of killing people. The wooden shaft is about 7 feet long, rough and unsanded. You can feel splinters catching at your already damaged palms. The billhook is actually not a terrible weapon. In theory, the hook can be used to grab enemy shields or pull riders from horses. The spike can puncture armor. The blade can cut, but it's heavy and awkward, requiring 2 hands to wield effectively, and you've never been trained in proper technique. You've been shown the basics: pointy end toward enemy. Try not to die, but there's been no real practice, no drilling, no muscle memory built up. You're expected to figure it out on the battlefield. Some of your fellow soldiers are getting different weapons. There are spear-simple wooden shafts with metal points, probably the oldest weapon design in human history and still effective. There are various types of polearms: halberds, glaives, military forks. One lucky bastard gets issued an actual sword, though it's a cheap falchion with a single-edged blade that looks like it's been sharpened and resharpened so many times that the edge is wavy. Most soldiers don't get swords. Swords are expensive, require skill to use effectively, and are primarily status symbols for the wealthy. Your billhook is what common soldiers get. Now let's talk about what it actually feels like to wear this equipment and try to do military activities. The combined weight of your gambeson, mail shirt, helmet, weapon, and basic supplies is probably around 60 pounds. That might not sound like much. People carry backpacks heavier than that while hiking. But this weight is distributed in the worst possible way. The mail pulls at your shoulders. The helmet makes your neck sore. The gambeson restricts your movement and makes you overheat instantly. And you're expected to march, run, fight, and climb siege ladders while carrying all this. You start marching toward the siege line, and within 10 minutes you're sweating profusely despite the cool morning air. The gambeson is like wearing a portable sauna. Sweat is running down your face, stinging your eyes, soaking into the padding of your helmet. Your thighs are chafing where the mail shirt rubs against them through your linen breeches. Each step is an exercise in endurance. Your feet, still damaged from days of standing in wet trenches, are screaming inside your rotting leather boots. The physical conditioning required for medieval warfare is no joke. Modern soldiers go through months of training to build up the strength and endurance needed for combat. You've had maybe 2 weeks of sporadic practice while simultaneously getting sicker and weaker from disease and malnutrition. Your body is in no condition to perform the tasks being demanded of it. Your muscles are already fatigued from yesterday's trench work. Your hands are injured and can barely grip the weapon shaft. You're mildly feverish from that infection in your leg. And now you're being asked to march 2 miles in armor and then assault fortified walls. Here's what nobody tells you about armor. It's not just heavy, it's restrictive. The mail shirt limits your range of motion. Try raising your arms above your head. The weight of the mail makes it difficult, and your shoulders are already tired from carrying it. Try bending down to pick something up. The mail pulls at your back and neck, creating painful pressure points. Everything takes more effort, requires more energy, leaves you more exhausted, and the heat is brutal. You might think it's medieval Europe. How hot can it be? But inside a gambeson and mail in direct sunlight, it's genuinely dangerous. Your core temperature is rising. You're sweating out fluids you can't afford to lose. Remember, you're already dehydrated from the dysentery you've been experiencing. You're getting dizzy. Your vision is starting to blur at the edges. You stumble and nearly fall, catching yourself on your billhook, and the sergeant screams at you to maintain formation. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers were generally more physically fit than modern people or whether we're romanticizing their capabilities. The truth is probably complicated. Yes, medieval people did more physical labor in daily life, which built functional strength. But they were also malnourished compared to modern standards, shorter on average, and suffered from various health conditions that would have limited their physical capabilities. The soldier marching next to you is maybe 5 feet 6 inches and weighs 140 pounds soaking wet, which he currently is from sweat. His idea of peak physical condition would be considered undernourished by modern military standards. You're carrying your billhook in both hands, trying to balance it while marching, and your arms are already tired. The weapon weighs maybe 10 pounds, which doesn't sound like much, but hold 10 pounds extended in front of you for an hour and see how your muscles feel. Your forearms are burning. Your shoulders are screaming. You try shifting the weapon to rest on your shoulder, but that throws off your balance and makes the march more difficult. Let's discuss what happens to your body during sustained physical exertion in armor. Your heart rate is elevated, probably around 120 to 130 beats per minute just from walking, higher when you have to move faster. Your breathing is labored because the weight on your chest makes deep breaths difficult. The mail shirt and gambeson are compressing your ribcage slightly, reducing your lung capacity. You're taking shorter, more frequent breaths, which is less efficient for oxygen exchange. Your body is working overtime just to keep moving forward. Your legs are particularly suffering. The quadriceps muscles that lift your legs with each step are burning. There's a deep ache in your hip flexors. Your calves are tight and threatening to cramp. Each time your foot hits the ground, the impact reverberates up through your damaged feet, your shins, your knees. Medieval people didn't have modern understanding of sports medicine or physical therapy, so there's no concept of proper stretching, no warm-up routine, no cool-down exercises. You just go from sedentary to full exertion and hope your body keeps functioning. The march continues. The sun is higher now, beating down without mercy. You're so thirsty your tongue feels swollen. The water skin makes its way down the line and you grab it desperately, tilting it back to get every possible drop. The water is warm, tastes like leather, and isn't nearly enough. You need gallons. You get maybe a cup's worth. It's gone in seconds, leaving you just as thirsty as before, but now with the added misery of knowing exactly how much water you're not getting. Someone in the ranks ahead of you collapses, just goes down mid-step, crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. Heat exhaustion, probably, or maybe his body just gave up from the accumulated stress of the past weeks. The formation doesn't stop. Men step over him or around him. Eventually some camp followers will come by and either help him recover or strip his corpse, depending on whether he's dead or just unconscious. You don't know which you're hoping for. Both options seem equally miserable. Your weapon is becoming a serious problem. You've been carrying this billhook for over an hour now, and your hands are cramping. The blisters that had started to scab over have reopened from gripping the rough wood. You can feel blood and clear fluid making the shaft slippery. You try adjusting your grip, but every position is painful. Your fingers are going numb from the constant pressure. You're genuinely worried that when it comes time to actually use this weapon in combat, your hands won't be able to hold onto it properly. The mental fatigue is almost worse than the physical. You're trying to stay alert, to maintain formation, to watch where you're walking, but your brain feels foggy and slow. You keep spacing out, losing track of time, coming back to awareness and realizing you've been marching on autopilot for the past 5 minutes with no memory of it. This is dangerous. In combat, this kind of mental fog gets you killed, but you can't shake it. Your body is shutting down non-essential functions to conserve energy, and apparently higher cognitive functions are considered non-essential. You finally reach the assembly area near the siege lines. The command is given to halt and rest, and you collapse onto the ground with profound gratitude. Just sitting down feels miraculous. Taking the weight off your feet, letting your arms drop to your sides, not having to actively move, it's the closest thing to pleasure you've experienced in weeks. Around you, hundreds of other soldiers are doing the same thing, groaning and complaining in multiple languages. Someone is crying. Someone else is vomiting, probably from heat exhaustion or nerves or both. You try to remove your helmet to cool down, but the sergeant screams at you to keep it on. Can't have the troops getting comfortable. Might make them harder to send to their deaths if they're feeling too relaxed. So you sit there, sweltering in your armor, feeling sweat pool in uncomfortable places, trying to catch your breath and gather energy for what's coming next. And what's coming next is the assault. Climbing siege ladders while people above you drop rocks and pour boiling oil. Fighting hand-to-hand in cramped spaces. Experiencing the absolute chaos and terror of medieval combat. All with arms that are already exhausted from carrying equipment. Hands that are injured and bleeding. a body that's weakened by disease and malnutrition, and exactly zero actual combat training. You look at the walls ahead. They seem impossibly high. You look at your billhook, now slick with your own blood. You look at your fellow soldiers, most of whom look just as terrified and unprepared as you feel. And you realize with crystal clarity that you are absolutely, completely, thoroughly fucked. Welcome to medieval warfare logistics, where the equipment is terrible, the physical demands are brutal, and your body starts giving up long before you reach actual combat. At least when you die, you won't have to carry this damn billhook anymore. The assault has been delayed. Not because of any tactical consideration or mercy from the commanders, but because the siege engines aren't ready, or the supply wagons haven't arrived, or some noble is arguing with another noble about who gets credit for the eventual victory. Nobody tells you the actual reason. You're just informed that you'll be holding position here, near the siege lines, until further orders. This could mean an hour. This could mean 3 days. Medieval military operations run on a timeline that can best be described as whenever we feel like it. So now you're sitting in what amounts to a staging area muddy field within sight of the enemy walls, surrounded by hundreds of other soldiers who are equally confused and miserable. This is where you'll discover that medieval warfare is actually 95% waiting around in uncomfortable conditions and 5% actual fighting. The waiting is somehow worse than the fighting because at least in combat, something is happening. The waiting is just nothing. Endless, boring, anxiety-inducing nothing. You can't take off your armor because you need to be ready at all times. So you sit there in full kit, sweating, uncomfortable, watching the sun move across the sky with agonizing slowness. Your mail shirt has created pressure sores on your shoulders where the weight concentrates. You can feel the skin there getting raw and tender. By tomorrow, those spots will be open wounds. By next week, if you survive that long, they'll be infected. This is just accepted as part of military life. The boredom is crushing. There's nothing to do. No books to read. Most soldiers are illiterate anyway, and books are expensive luxuries. No entertainment systems, no phones, no distractions whatsoever. Just sitting in the dirt with your thoughts and your discomfort. Some soldiers are sleeping, somehow managing to doze off despite the armor and the fear and the general awfulness of everything. You try to sleep too, but your mind won't shut off. You keep imagining all the ways you might die in the upcoming assault. Arrows, rocks, boiling oil, falling from a ladder, being crushed in the press of bodies. The possibilities are endless and your brain wants to explore every single one in vivid detail. Some men are gambling. They've pulled out dice made from bone or wood and are betting on the rolls. You watch a soldier lose his spare shirt, then his boots, then his weekly pay which he hasn't actually received yet but is gambling on credit. The medieval military economy runs heavily on informal debts and promises. Nobody has much cash. Most soldiers are owed weeks or months of back pay. So they gamble with money they don't have on the assumption that they'll live long enough to get paid and settle their debts. The whole system is built on optimism that's frankly unjustified given the mortality rates. You're getting hungry, but the food won't be distributed until evening. Your stomach is growling, that hollow ache of insufficient calories combining with the lingering intestinal distress from your dysentery. You're also desperately thirsty, but the water rations have already been distributed for the midday period and you've drunk yours. Now you just have to endure the thirst until the next distribution. Your mouth is dry, your tongue feels thick, and you're starting to get a headache from dehydration. This is your baseline state of existence now. Hungry, thirsty, uncomfortable, and scared. Let's talk about the psychological toll of waiting for combat. Your body is flooded with stress hormones cortisol and adrenaline primarily because your brain knows that danger is imminent. But the danger isn't immediate, so you can't act on that adrenaline. You just have to sit with it, feeling your heart race, your hands shake, your stomach churn. It's exhausting. The sustained anxiety burns through your energy reserves faster than physical activity would. You're tired from doing nothing except being afraid. Around you, different soldiers are coping in different ways. Some are praying, fingering religious symbols and muttering supplications to various saints. There's a guy near you who's been reciting the same prayer for the past hour, over and over, like a mantra. The repetition is almost soothing until you realize he's probably having some kind of psychological break. Another soldier is meticulously sharpening his weapon, running a whetstone along the blade with mechanical precision, even though the blade is already sharp. The activity gives him something to focus on besides the fear. One of the more experienced soldiers, a grizzled man with scars and a missing finger, is holding court with a group of younger troops, telling stories about previous campaigns. Some of the stories are probably true. Most are probably exaggerated. A few are definitely complete fabrications. But the younger soldiers listen with rapt attention because they desperately want to believe that survival is possible, that they too might become scarred veterans with stories to tell. The old soldier describes a battle where his unit broke through enemy lines and captured a noble worth a fortune in ransom. He conveniently leaves out the part where most of his unit died in that battle, or the fact that the ransom money got divided among so many survivors that each soldier's share was barely enough to buy new boots. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers were motivated primarily by pay, plunder, or genuine loyalty to their lords. The reality is probably all three, in varying degrees depending on the individual. You're here because your lord called for troops and you had no legal way to refuse. You're staying because desertion is punished by hanging and you have nowhere to run to anyway. And you're hoping desperately, futilely hoping that maybe there will be some profit in this. Maybe you'll capture something valuable. Maybe you'll survive and get paid. Maybe, somehow, this will all be worth it. The siege camp has developed its own little economy during the weeks of waiting. Camp followers, a mix of merchants, prostitutes, thieves, and general opportunists, have set up a makeshift marketplace just behind the military lines. They sell overpriced goods to soldiers who have no other options. A loaf of bread that would cost a penny in town costs 3 pennies here. A cup of wine goes for 5 pennies. The prices are extortionate. But what are you going to do? It's either pay or go without. Some soldiers are visiting the prostitutes, spending money they don't have on a few minutes of distraction. The camp followers' tents are easy to identify by the line of men waiting outside. It's transactional and joyless, but it's something other than sitting in armor thinking about death. So there's always a queue. You don't have money for that, and honestly, given the hygiene situation on both sides of the transaction, you're probably better off. Sexually transmitted diseases run rampant through military camps, and medieval medicine's approach to treating them is somehow even worse than their approach to other diseases. There are also professional gamblers working the camps, running rigged dice games that separate soldiers from their pay with practiced efficiency. The games are obviously fixed, the dice are weighted. The cups have false bottoms. The whole operation is a scam, but soldiers play anyway because boredom and desperation make people stupid. You watch a guy lose everything he owns. including the knife he needs for eating, to a smooth-talking gambler with quick hands. The soldier stands there for a moment, processing what just happened, then walks away in a daze. He'll probably desert tonight or pick a fight hoping someone will kill him quickly. Medieval military life has a way of grinding people down until death starts looking like a reasonable option. The waiting continues. The sun is starting to descend toward the horizon, turning the sky orange and pink in a display that would be beautiful if you weren't so miserable. Your body aches from sitting in armor for hours. Your ass is numb. Your legs have fallen asleep. When you finally try to stand up for the evening formation, your legs buckle and you nearly fall. Pins and needles shoot through your feet as blood flow returns. You stamp your feet trying to restore feeling, creating small stabbing pains with each impact. Evening rations are distributed, the same dark bread and watery pottage you've been eating for weeks. The bread is so stale it could be used as a weapon. You have to dip it in the pottage just to make it soft enough to chew. And even then it's a struggle. Your jaw aches from the effort. The pottage is thin and tasteless, barely warm, with a few chunks of something that might be turnip floating in it. You eat it anyway, scooping it up with the bread, getting every last drop because you don't know when the next meal will come. After eating, you're finally allowed to remove your armor for the night. The relief is incredible. Peeling off the mail shirt feels like shedding 100 pounds. Your shoulders suddenly feel light, almost floaty. You can breathe deeply for the first time in hours. You remove your gambeson and the cold evening air hits your sweat-soaked shirt, making you shiver. You're simultaneously too hot and too cold, which seems to be your permanent state. The pressure sores on your shoulders are worse than you thought. The skin is red and raw, beginning to crack in places. You try to examine them but can't see properly without a mirror, which obviously you don't have. You ask a fellow soldier to look, and he makes a face that tells you everything you need to know. You'll want to put something on those, he says, which is helpful advice except you don't have anything to put on them. No medicine, no salves, no bandages. You'll just have to hope they don't get infected, which is a foolish hope given that literally everything in this camp is contaminated with something. You spread out your bedroll in a spot that looks slightly less muddy than the surrounding areas. This is where you'll sleep tonight, right here in the staging area, in full view of the enemy walls, surrounded by hundreds of other soldiers doing the same thing. There's no privacy, no comfort, no shelter unless it rains and they break out the tarps. You lie down on the thin wool blanket and immediately feel rocks poking into your back. You shift position. Different rocks. Same discomfort. Eventually you just accept it and try to relax. The sounds of the camp at night are their own particular hell. Hundreds of men coughing, snoring, farting, talking in their sleep. Someone is crying quietly, trying to muffle the sound but not succeeding. Someone else is having a nightmare, making small distressed noises that eventually escalate to full screaming before his companions shake him awake. The smell is remarkable body odor, bad breath, farts, the latrine trenches upwind, smoke from the cook fires. You're breathing all of this in with every breath. You can't sleep. Your body is exhausted, but your mind won't shut down. You keep thinking about tomorrow, or whenever the assault actually happens. You imagine climbing a ladder while arrows fall around you. You imagine reaching the top of the wall and having a defender smash your face with a mace. You imagine falling, the sickening moment of free fall before impact. You imagine being wounded, lying in the mud screaming while everyone else steps over you to continue the assault. The night is cold. You wrap yourself in your blanket, but it's not enough. You're shivering within an hour, teeth chattering, curled into a ball trying to conserve warmth. The ground is leaching heat from your body with merciless efficiency. Your hip bones ache from the hard ground. Your shoulder, the one you're lying on, has gone numb from the pressure. You roll over to give it relief, and now the other shoulder starts hurting. There's no comfortable position. You're just rotating through various states of discomfort until dawn. Somewhere around midnight, it starts to rain. Just a light drizzle at first, but enough to soak through your blanket and make everything worse. The tarps don't get distributed either. Someone forgot or decided it wasn't raining hard enough to warrant the effort. So you just lie there getting wet, shivering harder, wondering if hypothermia is going to kill you before you even make it to the assault. Other soldiers are cursing, some are praying, some have just given up and are lying motionless in the rain like corpses. This is what medieval siege warfare actually looks like. Not glorious charges and heroic combat, but endless waiting in miserable conditions while your body slowly breaks down and your mind frays from the combination of boredom, fear, and physical discomfort. The actual fighting, when it comes, will almost be a relief because at least it will be over quickly one way or another. But this waiting, this grinding, soul-crushing waiting in cold and mud and fear, this is the real warfare. This is what breaks armies. Not enemy action, but simple misery sustained over days and weeks until men would rather take their chances in combat than spend another night in these conditions. You eventually fall into a fitful sleep sometime before dawn, plagued by anxiety dreams where you're trying to run but your legs won't work properly, or you're fighting but your weapon passes through enemies without effect. When you wake up a few hours later, you feel worse than before you slept. Your body is stiff and sore, your clothes are damp, and the knowledge that you have to put that armor back on and do this all over again is almost too much to bear. But you will bear it, because what choice do you have? Welcome to the siege stalemate, where boredom is the enemy and time moves like cold honey. The assault is finally happening. After 3 days of waiting in the staging area, 3 days of cold nights, inadequate food, spreading dysentery, and mounting anxiety, the order comes at dawn. You're roused by sergeants screaming, by the clang of weapons being gathered, by the general chaos of hundreds of men trying to organize themselves into something resembling a fighting force. Your body protests immediately. You're stiff from sleeping on the ground, still tired because you barely slept, and the thought of putting that armor back on makes you want to cry. But you put it on anyway. The gambeson goes over your damp shirt, heavy and cold. The mail shirt follows, that familiar crushing weight settling onto your shoulders and immediately making your healing pressure sores scream in protest. The helmet goes on your head, wobbling slightly because it still doesn't fit right. You pick up your billhook with hands that are stiff and painful, the reopened blisters making every grip agony. Around you, other soldiers are going through the same ritual, their faces showing the same dread you're feeling. The plan, as it's been explained to you in medieval military planning being what it is, explained is a generous term, is straightforward in its simplicity and suicidal in its execution. Your unit will advance across the open ground toward the walls while carrying scaling ladders. These ladders are crude wooden affairs, maybe 20 feet long, heavy and awkward. Takes 6 men to carry each one. You're not one of the ladder carriers, which is either good luck or bad luck depending on how you look at it. Ladder carriers are obvious targets, but they also have their hands full and can't be expected to fight until they've placed the ladder, so there's some protection in that role. You, on the other hand, will be expected to climb the ladder once it's in place while also fending off defenders who are trying to kill you. The formation assembles. You're in the third rank, which means you'll be climbing ladders after the first two ranks have already been slaughtered. This is supposed to be better than being in the front rank, but really it just means you get to watch people die before it's your turn. The logic is that the initial waves will exhaust the defenders, use up their arrows and rocks, and then the later waves will have an easier time. In practice, defenders don't run out of rocks, they just knock stones off their own fortifications and drop them on your head. The advance begins. You start walking toward the walls, which look impossibly tall from down here. The distance you need to cover is maybe 200 yards of open ground. 200 yards where you're completely exposed to enemy fire. The defenders are already visible on the walls. Tiny figures moving around preparing to rain death down on you. You can see them positioning rocks at the crenellations, ready to push them over. You can see archers knocking arrows. You're walking toward these people who are about to try their hardest to kill you, and every instinct in your body is screaming at you to run the other direction. But you keep walking because the sergeant is right behind you with a stick, ready to beat anyone who breaks formation. Because the men to your left and right are also walking, and there's shame in being the one who runs. Because medieval military discipline relies heavily on the fact that running toward the enemy might kill you, but running away from the enemy will definitely get you killed by your own commanders. So you walk, step by terrible step, trying to keep your grip on the billhook steady even though your hands are shaking. The first arrows start falling when you're about 100 yards out. Not aimed shots, the distance is too great for accuracy but volley fire, sending dozens of arrows up in high arcs to fall among the advancing troops. You hear the distinctive whistle thump sound as arrows hit the ground around you. One lands 2 feet to your left, vibrating in the dirt. Another hits the man in front of you, punching through his shoulder, and he goes down screaming. The formation doesn't stop. Men step over him or around him, and he's lost in the press of bodies behind you. More arrows are falling now, a constant rain of death from above. The sound is terrible, the whistle of incoming projectiles, the thuds of impact, the screams of men being hit. An arrow clangs off your helmet, a glancing blow that sends shockwaves through your skull and makes your ears ring. You stumble but keep moving, heart hammering so hard you can feel it in your throat. Someone next to you takes an arrow in the face and drops instantly, dead before he hits the ground. Blood sprays across your mail shirt. You're maybe 50 yards from the walls now, and the defenders are switching from arrows to rocks. These aren't pebbles, these are chunks of masonry weighing 10, 20, 30 pounds, dropped from 30 feet up. When they hit someone, the results are catastrophic. You watch a rock hit a soldier's head, and his helmet crumples like paper. He collapses in a way that tells you he's dead instantly, his neck bent at an impossible angle. Another rock hits someone's leg and you hear the bone break from 10 feet away, a sound like a green branch snapping. The ladder carriers are having a terrible time. The ladders are heavy and unwieldy, and every time someone carrying one gets hit by an arrow or rock, the whole ladder tips and the other carriers have to compensate. One ladder falls completely when 3 of the 6 carriers go down in quick succession. The survivors try to lift it again, but there aren't enough of them. The ladder gets abandoned, and those men scatter, looking for another unit to attach themselves to. You reach the base of the wall. The first ladder goes up, men straining to lift it and lean it against the stone. You're pressed against the wall now, in the tiny margin of safety where the defenders can't shoot straight down without leaning way out over the crenellations. But it's not actually safe. Rocks are still falling, bouncing off the wall in unpredictable directions. And there's another horror you weren't prepared for. The defenders are pouring things off the walls. Boiling water comes first, a cascade of scalding liquid that hits someone climbing a nearby ladder. His screams are immediate and agonizing. The water has soaked through his gambeson. Remember, padded cloth is great at absorbing liquids and is now cooking the skin underneath. He loses his grip on the ladder and falls, hitting the ground hard and lying there writhing and screaming until someone mercifully stabs him to end the suffering. Then comes the oil. Not olive oil for cooking, but cheap, rancid oil that's been heated to just below combustion temperature. It's thick and sticky, and when it hits cloth it soaks in immediately. A splash lands on your shoulder, and the pain is incredible, a burning sensation that goes through the mail and gambeson straight to your skin. You're screaming before you realize it, trying to scrape the oil off but only spreading it around. Your shoulder is blistering, the skin bubbling and peeling, and the assault hasn't even really started yet. Someone is pushing you toward a ladder. You look up and see what you're supposed to climb. A wobbly wooden ladder leaning against a stone wall, already crowded with men trying to ascend while defenders at the top do everything possible to kill them. The man currently at the top of your ladder gets a rock dropped on his head. He falls backward, knocking off the two men below him, and all three crash to the ground in a tangle of bodies and weapons. One of them lands on his own billhook. The spike punches through his chest and out his back. He makes a horrible, wet, gasping sound and then stops moving. But the sergeant is screaming at you to climb, and there are men behind you pushing forward, and you don't have a choice. You grab the ladder with your damaged hands and start climbing. The rungs are slippery with blood and other fluids. Your mail shirt makes it hard to move your arms properly. The ladder is bouncing and swaying because it's poorly secured and there are multiple people climbing it simultaneously. Each time someone above you moves, the whole structure shudders. You're maybe 6 rungs up 10 feet off the ground when you make the mistake of looking down. The ground below is a chaos of bodies, blood, dropped weapons, and wounded men screaming for help that isn't coming. There are more bodies than you would have thought possible for the short time you've been fighting. Medieval combat is efficient at producing casualties. Looking up isn't better. You can see the top of the wall, see defenders moving around up there, see them grabbing more rocks. You watch one defender, just a regular guy, probably not that different from you except he's behind fortifications. Instead of climbing toward them, lift a stone about the size of a watermelon. He looks right at you, makes eye contact for a brief moment, and drops it. You try to dodge, but there's nowhere to go. The rock hits your helmet at an angle, a glancing blow that still feels like someone hit you with a sledgehammer. Your vision goes white, then sparkly, then dark around the edges. Your grip on the ladder loosens. You're falling backward, and time does that weird thing where it seems to slow down. You have time to think, this is how I die, before you hit the ground. Except you don't hit the ground, you hit other soldiers who break your fall. The impact still drives the air from your lungs and sends pain shooting through your back. But it doesn't kill you. You lie there for a moment, stunned, trying to remember how breathing works. Your helmet is dented inward on one side, pressing against your skull. You reach up with shaking hands and manage to pull it off. Blood is running down your face from somewhere on your scalp. Everything is ringing and distant. Someone hauls you to your feet, taking up space. And space at the base of a siege ladder is premium real estate. You stumble away from the wall, trying to get your bearings, And that's when you see the full scope of the disaster unfolding around you. The assault is failing. Badly. Multiple ladders have been pushed away from the walls, sending their climbers crashing down. The defenders have started dropping burning bundles of straw onto the troops below, and several soldiers are on fire, running in circles and screaming while their companions try to smother the flames. The formation is breaking down. Men are running away from the walls, and the sergeants are trying to rally them, screaming and hitting people with sticks. But it's not working. The assault has turned into a rout. You're swept up in the backwards tide, stumbling over bodies and debris, your head still spinning from the rock impact, blood dripping into your eyes and making it hard to see. Arrows are still falling. The defenders are shooting at the retreating soldiers now, and arrows are hitting people in the back as they run. It's like shooting fish in a barrel. A man next to you takes an arrow between his shoulder blades and pitches forward onto his face. You nearly trip over him but manage to keep your feet. You make it back to relative safety back behind the siege trenches where the defenders' arrows can't easily reach. You collapse onto the ground, gasping for breath, your entire body shaking from adrenaline and fear and shock. Around you, other survivors are doing the same thing. The casualties are being brought back. Men with arrows sticking out of them, men with crushed limbs, men with burns, men who are already dead but are being carried back anyway because leaving them under the walls means the defenders will strip the bodies and mock the corpses. The assault lasted maybe 20 minutes from start to finish. 20 minutes of concentrated chaos and violence. And in that time, your unit has lost at least a third of its strength. Maybe more 2 days to count accurately. The wounded are screaming, begging for help, and the medical staff such as it ISIS overwhelmed. Men are lying in the dirt bleeding out while waiting for someone to even look at their injuries. You reach up and touch your head, trying to find the source of the blood. There's a gash on your scalp where the rock hit, maybe 3 inches long, and it's bleeding freely the way head wounds do. Probably looks worse than it is, but it's hard to tell when you're the one bleeding. Your shoulder where the oil hit is a mass of pain, blistered and raw. Your hands are bleeding from the blisters that tore open during the climb. Your back hurts from the fall. Your body is one big catalog of injuries, none of them individually fatal but collectively making you wish you were dead. Someone hands you a water skin and you drink greedily, not caring that the water tastes terrible and probably isn't clean. You're alive. You survived. Against all probability, you made it through your first real combat experience. And the only thing you can think is, how many more times am I going to have to do this before I'm allowed to go home? Welcome to medieval assault combat, where the tactics are simplistic, the casualties are horrific, and surviving the first attack just means you get to be traumatized all over again tomorrow. You're lying in the dirt behind the siege lines, trying to process what just happened, when someone grabs your arm and hauls you to your feet. It's one of the medical orderlies, a position that in medieval armies means guy who knows slightly more about injuries than everyone else, which is to say almost nothing. He takes one look at your bleeding head, your blistered shoulder, and your general state of shock and says, "You'll live. Can you walk?" You nod, even though you're not entirely sure that's true. Your legs are shaking so badly you can barely stand, but you can technically walk, so that apparently means you're fine. The orderly points you toward what passes for a field hospitala section of trampled grass where wounded soldiers are being dumped in rough rows while the camp physicians try to prioritize who might be savable and who's going to die regardless of intervention. You stumble in that direction, weaving between bodies. Some are clearly dead already. Others are making sounds you didn't know humans could make: wet, gurgling screams, animal whimpering, desperate prayers in languages you don't recognize. The smell hits you before you even reach the medical area. Blood, obviously, but also bowel contents from abdominal wounds, the sick sweet smell of burned flesh, and something else, something metallic and wrong that you'll later learn is the smell of people dying in large numbers. The field hospital is organized by a simple triage system. Those who will probably survive are on one side, those who are definitely dying are on the other side, and there's a middle section for unclear cases. You're directed to the probably survive section, which should feel reassuring but mostly just feels like you're being told your injuries aren't impressive enough to warrant immediate attention. You sit down on the ground next to other walking wounded and wait your turn. The man next to you has an arrow still sticking out of his thigh. It went in at an angle, and you can see maybe 6 inches of shaft protruding from his leg, the fletching surprisingly intact. He's not screaming past that point, just sitting very still and breathing in shallow gasps. His face is pale, lips almost blue, and you recognize the signs of shock even though you don't know the medical term for it. His body is shutting down from blood loss and trauma. Across the way, in the definitely dying section, a physician is performing what medieval medicine calls surgery. The patient is a man who took a rock to his arm, completely shattering the bones between elbow and wrist. The arm is mangled beyond any hope of saving, so the solution is amputation. You watch, horrified and unable to look away, as they prepare for the procedure. The patient is given a leather strap to bite down on and a cup of wine mixed with something, probably poppy juice if they have any, though supplies are limited and this soldier isn't important enough to warrant the good stuff. For strong men hold him down, pinning his shoulders and legs. The physician, who by day might be a barber, because barbers and surgeons are often the same profession in medieval times, takes out a saw. Not a medical saw, just a regular woodworking saw that's been used on who knows what else. The cutting begins, and the screaming starts immediately despite the leather strap. The patient is thrashing so hard it takes all 4 men to hold him down. The physician is working as fast as he can, sawing through flesh and muscle and finally bone with a grinding sound that makes your stomach heave. Blood is everywhere, spraying with each heartbeat, soaking into the ground. The whole process takes maybe 3 minutes but feels like hours. When the arm finally comes free, it's tossed aside onto a growing pile of severed limbs that nobody has bothered to do anything with yet. The stump is cauterized with a red-hot iron. You can hear the sizzle and smell the burning meat, and the patient has mercifully passed out from the pain. He'll probably die anyway from shock or infection or blood loss, but at least the gangrenous arm won't kill him. Medieval medicine is all about these small victories. A physician finally makes it to you. He's covered in blood up to his elbows, his apron stiff with dried gore from previous patients. He doesn't wash his hands. The germ theory of disease won't be discovered for several more centuries. Just wipes them vaguely on his already filthy apron and starts examining your head wound. Scalp wounds bleed a lot, he says, with the casual tone of someone commenting on the weather. Looks worse than it is. He produces a needle and thread, actual thread, not catgut or anything designed for medical use, just regular linen thread, and proceeds to stitch your head wound closed without any anesthetic whatsoever. Each punch of the needle through your scalp sends lightning bolts of pain through your skull. You grit your teeth and try not to move, knowing that flinching will only make it worse. He ties off the stitches with rough efficiency and moves on to your shoulder. The oil burn is blistered and already starting to weep clear fluid. The physician pokes at it with unwashed fingers, and you hiss in pain. "This'll get infected," he says matter-of-factly, as if infection is just an inevitable part of life rather than something that might be prevented. He reaches for a jar containing some kind of salve, hope it's honey or something with actual antimicrobial properties. But it's probably just rendered animal fat mixed with herbs. He smears it liberally over the burn, and the pain somehow gets worse. Then he wraps it with a strip of cloth that looks like it was torn from someone's old shirt and hasn't been washed recently. "Keep it clean," he instructs, which is hilarious advice given that you're living in a medieval military camp where nothing is clean and you're going to be putting armor back on over this wound tomorrow. But you nod anyway because what else are you going to do? He doesn't even look at your hands. The blistered, bleeding palms that are making it nearly impossible to grip anything are apparently not worth medical attention. "They'll heal on their own," he says dismissively, and moves on to the next patient. You sit there for a moment, newly stitched and bandaged, and realize that's it. That's the extent of medieval battlefield medicine. No antibiotics to prevent infection. No proper painkillers beyond maybe some willow bark tea if you're lucky. No sterile technique. No understanding of how infections spread. No real treatment beyond try to stop the bleeding and hope for the best. The man with the arrow in his leg is being treated now. The physician examines the wound and makes a decision. The arrow has to come out. There are two schools of thought on arrow removal in medieval medicine. The first is to push it all the way through and out the other side. The second is to cut down to the head and pull it back out the way it entered. Both options are agonizing and likely to cause massive tissue damage. The physician chooses option 2. He takes a knife again, not a specialized medical instrument, just a knife, and begins cutting into the thigh around the arrow shaft. The patient is screaming, begging him to stop, but four orderlies hold him down while the physician works. He's cutting deep, trying to expose the arrowhead, and blood is flowing freely. When he finally gets a grip on the arrowhead with a pair of tongs, he yanks it out in one motion. The barbed head tears tissue on the way out, creating a wound that's now much larger than the entrance hole. The physician packs the wound with cloth, more questionably clean cloth, and wraps the whole thigh tightly. "If it swells and turns red, come back," he says, which is medieval medical speak for when this gets infected, we'll probably have to amputate. The patient is white as a ghost, barely conscious, and his chances of avoiding infection are essentially zero. Historians still argue whether medieval battlefield medicine saved more lives than it ended through complications, but watching these procedures, you're starting to lean toward the latter. The complete lack of sterile technique, the reuse of instruments between patients without cleaning, the practice of probing wounds with unwashed fingers, all of this virtually guarantees that infections will spread. But this is the best medical care available. These physicians are trying their hardest with the knowledge they have. It's just that their knowledge is catastrophically insufficient. You watch as another soldier is brought in with an abdominal wound. A sword or spear has punctured his belly, and intestines are visible through the wound. The physician takes one look and shakes his head. There's nothing to be done. Abdominal wounds are death sentences in an era before antibiotics and sterile surgery. The soldier is moved to the definitely dying section and given water to drink while he waits for the inevitable. He'll probably last a few hours, maybe a day if he's unlucky, before sepsis kills him. Burns are treated with the same generic salve used on everything else, or sometimes with egg whites beaten to a froth. Broken bones are set with splints made from scrap wood and wrapped with more of those dubiously clean cloth strips. Dislocated joints are popped back into place through brute force and the patient's agonized screaming. There's no X-ray to confirm proper alignment. No way to see if bones have been set correctly. The physician just manipulates the limb until it feels right and hopes for the best. The concept of pain management is rudimentary at best. The wealthy might get opium tinctures or strong spirits. Common soldiers get leather straps to bite on and alcohol if they're lucky. Mostly they're just expected to endure. Medieval people had a different relationship with pain than modern humans, not because they felt it less, but because there was so little that could be done about it that they had to develop coping mechanisms. Pain was just part of life, to be endured stoically or screamed through and forgotten. Your head is throbbing where it was stitched. The wound on your shoulder is burning despite the salve. Your hands ache every time you move your fingers. And you're one of the lucky ones. You're walking, conscious, and have all your limbs attached. Around you are men missing arms or legs, men with their guts spilling out, men who are clearly not going to make it through the night. The moaning and crying creates a constant background noise that seeps into your brain and makes coherent thought difficult. An orderly comes through with a wheelbarrow, collecting the amputated limbs from the pile and wheeling them away to be buried or burned. The pile is larger than you would have expected, at least a dozen arms and legs, severed at various points, some still in the boots or gloves their owners had been wearing. It's surreal and horrible, like something from a nightmare, except you're awake and this is real. The sun is setting now, casting long shadows across the field hospital. The physicians are still working, moving from patient to patient with mechanical efficiency born of exhaustion. They've been at this for hours, ever since the failed assault ended, and they'll be at it for hours more. There are too many wounded and too few medical staff. Some of the wounded won't be seen until tomorrow, and by then their treatable injuries will have become infections, and those infections will kill them. You try to stand up and immediately regret it. Your head swims, your vision darkens at the edges, and you sit back down hard. Blood loss and shock are catching up with you. Someone hands you a cup of water and you drink it in gulps, not caring that it's probably contaminated. Hydration is more immediately important than worrying about waterborne diseases that might kill you in a week. As darkness falls, lanterns are lit around the medical area. The flickering light creates dancing shadows that make everything look even more nightmarish. You can see physicians still working, silhouettes bent over patients, the occasional glint of metal instruments catching the light. The sounds continue. The screaming has mostly died down, replaced by quieter moans and whimpers as exhaustion and shock set in. Some men are praying. Some are calling for their mothers. Some are just silent, staring at nothing, processing trauma that will probably haunt them for whatever remains of their lives. You eventually stumble back to your bedroll, or what's left of it. Someone has stolen your blanket while you were getting medical attention. This is normal in military camps. Anything not actively being guarded will be taken by someone who needs it more or just wants to trade it for food or dice money. You lie down on the bare ground, your stitched head resting on your folded gambeson, and stare up at the stars. Your body is a map of pain. Every position is uncomfortable. Every breath hurts where your ribs are bruised from the fall. But underneath the physical pain is something worse, the psychological impact of what you've witnessed. The violence, the suffering, the casual brutality of medieval warfare. Modern soldiers would receive counseling for trauma like this. You get nothing except the expectation that you'll be ready to fight again tomorrow. Welcome to medieval battlefield medicine, where the treatments are primitive, the hygiene is non-existent, and surviving your wounds just means dying slower from infection. You wake up the next morning if the few hours of fitful, pain-racked unconsciousness can be called sleep to discover that you're being ordered back to duty. Your head is throbbing where the stitches pull at your scalp. Your shoulder is radiating heat, which is probably not a good sign. Your hands are so stiff and swollen that you can barely make a fist. But none of this matters because the assault failed yesterday, which means it's going to be tried again today. And you're still ambulatory, so you're still combat effective by medieval standards. The army didn't capture the walls yesterday. They didn't even come close. What they did accomplish was identifying which sections of wall are most heavily defended, where the best ladder placement might be, and approximately how many men need to die before the defenders run out of rocks. This is what passes for tactical reconnaissance in medieval siege warfare. The commanders have learned from yesterday's disaster, and their lesson is apparently, try the same thing but with more men. But here's where the medieval military economy reveals its darker side. Yesterday's assault failed, and the siege is now in its 7th week. Supplies are running low. The army's funds are nearly exhausted. The soldiers haven't been paid in weeks. Morale is collapsing faster than the trench walls in the rain. And there's only one solution that medieval commanders can reliably implement. If we take the city, there will be plunder. The promise of looting transforms the entire dynamic. Suddenly, soldiers who were ready to desert are volunteering for the next assault. Not because they've developed courage or loyalty, but because a captured city means profit. The rules of medieval warfare are brutally simple. If a city surrenders, it's usually treated with relative mercy. If it forces an army to take it by storm, making soldiers die in the process, then it's forfeit. Everything inside becomes property of the conquering army. Every merchant's shop, every noble's house, every church's treasury, and more importantly, every person inside becomes a potential hostage for ransom. The sergeant is explaining this to the assembled troops with barely contained enthusiasm. 3 days, he says. If we take the city, you get 3 days of free plunder before order is restored. Everything you can carry is yours. Every rich merchant you can capture can be ransomed. The churches alone have enough gold and silver to make you all wealthy men. This is a lie, of course. The churches probably do have valuables, but those will be claimed by the commanders and nobles leading the army. What common soldiers will actually get is permission to rob the homes of common townspeople, most of whom are barely wealthier than the soldiers themselves. But the promise is intoxicating nonetheless. You're desperate, hungry, tired, and in pain. The fantasy of wealth is the only thing keeping you going. There's something darker being promised too, though it's not stated explicitly: women. Medieval armies operating under the sack rules allowed soldiers to assault the female population of captured cities. This wasn't considered a war crime, it was considered one of the perks of victory, a way to motivate soldiers and terrorize the enemy population. The sergeant doesn't say this directly, but everyone understands it. You see some of the soldiers around you getting excited, making crude jokes, and you feel sick. This is what you've become part of. This is what military service actually means. But you're also calculating, because you're desperate enough to think like a predator now. If you survive the assault and the city falls, you could potentially grab something valuable. Not much. The real prizes will be taken by men with more rank and fewer scruples, but maybe enough to make this nightmare worth it. Maybe you could capture a minor noble or wealthy merchant and ransom them. Medieval ransom protocols are well established. You keep the prisoner alive, negotiate a price with their family, and split the proceeds with your commanding officer. It's a business transaction wrapped in violence. The concept of prisoners and ransom deserves more exploration because it's central to how medieval warfare actually functions. Knights and nobles are too valuable to kill outright in most circumstances. When a nobleman is captured, he's treated relatively well because he represents a walking bag of money. His family will pay substantial ransoms to get him back, sometimes amounts that equal years of their estate's income. Common soldiers can't usually afford to ransom themselves, so they're more likely to be killed or enslaved if captured. But even common soldiers might be kept alive if they're skilled craftsmen or if there's any chance of extracting payment. You've heard stories from veterans about the ransom economy. One soldier in camp supposedly captured a minor baron during a previous campaign and received enough ransom money to buy a small farm. He's still here, though, fighting in another war, because medieval economics are such that even a windfall gets spent quickly and then you're back to needing income. The promise of another big score keeps soldiers coming back to war even when they know the odds are against them. It's gambling, essentially betting your life against the chance of a major payout. But there's also the darker side of post-battle conduct: executions. When prisoners can't be ransomed and are too dangerous to release, they're killed. Not in the heat of combat, but afterward, in cold blood. It's considered pragmatic rather than cruel. You can't guard large numbers of prisoners when you're an army on campaign with limited resources. So captured soldiers who can't pay ransom and aren't valuable for exchange are simply executed, often by having their throats cut efficiently and their bodies dumped in mass graves. You're being asked to participate in this system. If you survive the assault and the city falls, you'll be expected to help round up prisoners, to sort through the population identifying who might be valuable. You'll be expected to guard captured civilians while the ransom negotiations happen. And if negotiations fail, you might be expected to participate in executions. This is just part of military service, explained as casually as duty rotations or meal schedules. The psychological weight of this is crushing. You're being transformed from a person with normal human empathy into a predator who views other humans as potential profit sources. Medieval military service doesn't just risk your life, it damages your soul, assuming you survive long enough to have moral qualms about what you're doing. Right now, standing here in pain and fear and desperate hunger, the promise of plunder sounds reasonable. You've been brutalized enough that brutalizing others seems like fair compensation. The second assault is organized somewhat better than the first, if only because half the incompetent soldiers died yesterday and the commanders have a clearer picture of what won't work. The ladders are being positioned at different points along the wall, trying to spread the defenders' attention. Some soldiers are carrying bundles of wood and brush to fill in the base of the walls, creating platforms for the ladders. It's still fundamentally the same suicidal plan run across open ground. Raise ladders, climb into a kill zone, but with minor tactical adjustments. You're in the second wave this time, which means you'll advance after the first wave has either succeeded or been slaughtered. This should feel better than being in the first wave, but actually it's worse because you have to stand there watching the initial assault, knowing you're next. The first wave forms up and begins their advance. You watch arrows start falling, watch men go down, watch the ladders go up against the walls. The sounds are the same as yesterday: screaming, the thud of impacts, the crash of falling bodies. One ladder actually makes its soldiers reach the top and start fighting on the walls. You can see the combat happening, tiny figures struggling and falling. Then defenders arrive in greater numbers and push the attackers back. Bodies fall from the walls, tumbling through the air before hitting the ground with impacts you can hear from 100 yards away. The ladder is pushed away from the wall and crashes down, taking several climbers with it. Your wave is ordered forward. Here we go again. You start walking toward the walls, billhook in your damaged hands, head wound throbbing with each heartbeat, shoulder burning under your armor. The arrows start falling and you flinch with each whistle thump of impact nearby. A man 3 positions to your left takes an arrow in his throat and goes down gurgling. You keep walking. Someone behind you is praying in a constant stream of Latin that blends into meaningless sound. You reach the walls. A ladder is already in place, previous climbers having been cleared off. You start climbing without letting yourself think about it, because thinking will make you freeze and freezing will get you killed by your own sergeant. 1 rung, another rung. Don't look down. Don't look up. Just climb. Your hands are screaming in protest, blisters tearing open, blood making the rungs slippery. Something hot splashes across your back, more boiling water or oil. The pain is incredible, but you keep climbing because stopping means falling. You're maybe halfway up the ladder now, and someone above you loses their grip and falls past you, so close you feel the displacement of air. They hit the ground below with a wet crunch. You keep climbing. Your arms are shaking from exhaustion and pain. Each rung is a monumental effort. You can see the top of the wall now, see defenders moving around. One of them looks over the edge and sees you climbing. He grabs a rock. You try to climb faster, but your body won't respond. He drops the rock. Time slows down in that weird way it does during extreme stress. You watch the rock fall toward you, and your brain is calculating trajectory, and you realize with absolute clarity that you can't dodge this. It's going to hit you. The rock strikes your left arm, above the elbow, with tremendous force. You feel the bone crack, a sensation more than a sound, a deep wrongness in your arm that makes your stomach heave. Your grip on the ladder loosens. You're falling. You hit the ground on your back, and the impact drives every bit of air from your lungs. For several seconds you can't breathe at all. Just lie there suffocating while your body tries to remember how respiration works. When breath finally comes back, it's in painful gasps. Your left arm is at a strange angle, definitely broken, and the pain is extraordinary. Shock is setting in fast, your vision is tunneling. Sounds are becoming muffled and distant. Someone grabs you and drags you away from the base of the wall. You're deposited in a safer area, and that's where you lie while the assault continues without you. The battle rages for another hour, and you drift in and out of consciousness, occasionally aware of the sounds of combat, occasionally aware of the pain in your arm, mostly just floating in a gray space where nothing feels quite real. The assault fails again. The army retreats again. The casualties are even higher this time because the defenders were prepared and had restocked their ammunition. When you're finally coherent enough to look around, you see that your unit has been decimated. Maybe 1 in 3 soldiers who started this morning's assault are still walking. The rest are dead, wounded, or have deserted during the chaos. You're carried back to the field hospital, the same nightmare space you visited yesterday, now even more crowded with fresh casualties. A physician examines your arm with rough efficiency. Clean break, he announces, as if this is good news. He manipulates the bone back into approximate alignment while you scream into a leather strap, then splints it with pieces of wood and wraps it tightly. 6 weeks, maybe 8, he says. Keep it still. 6 to 8 weeks. You're effectively out of combat for 2 months. Assuming the break heals properly and doesn't get infected and you don't die from any of your other injuries in the meantime. The army isn't going to send you home. You're still technically part of the unit, still owed wages, still expected to contribute somehow. You'll be assigned to camp duties, carrying water, helping with cooking, cleaning latrines, whatever one-armed soldiers can do. It's humiliating and painful, and at least you're not climbing any more ladders. But the moral injury is worse than the physical one. You participated in a system designed to turn human suffering into profit. You were ready to loot homes, capture prisoners for ransom, participate in the brutal logic of medieval warfare where people are commodities to be exploited. Whether the city eventually falls or not, whether you ever see any plunder or not, you've been changed by the experience. You've seen what you're capable of when desperate enough. You've learned that your ethics are negotiable when survival is on the line. Welcome to the medieval military economy, where profit motivates everything. Prisoners are valuable commodities, and moral collapse is just part of the job description. 3 months have passed since your arm was broken. 3 months of living in this increasingly desperate siege camp, watching the army slowly consume itself through attrition, disease, and the grinding psychological toll of failed assault after failed assault. Your arm has healed, more or less the bone knitted together at a slightly wrong angle, leaving you with a permanent weakness and a dull ache when the weather changes. The physician said you were lucky it healed at all without getting infected. You suppose that's true, though lucky feels like a strange word to describe anything about your situation. The siege finally ended 2 weeks ago, not with a triumphant assault but with negotiated surrender. The city agreed to pay a substantial tribute to the army in exchange for being spared a sack. This means no plunder for common soldiers, no ransoms, no profit beyond the meager back pay that's being distributed in inconsistent dribs and drabs. The soldiers who survived are bitter and angry, feeling cheated of the rewards they were promised, conveniently forgetting that most of them would have died in a final assault anyway. You're just relieved you won't have to climb any more ladders or participate in whatever atrocities would have followed a successful storming of the walls. Now comes the part that history books rarely discuss: going home. Or trying to. The army is being disbanded, which sounds organized but actually means everyone is being told campaign's over, find your own way back. There's no demobilization process, no transportation provided, no real support system. You're just released, given what pay you're owed, which is less than half what you were promised. The rest having been lost to expenses, in that vague way medieval military accounting works, and told to figure it out yourself. You're walking home because you can't afford a horse or even a spot in a wagon. The journey will take weeks, covering maybe 15 miles a day if you're lucky, through territory that may or may not be safe. You're traveling with a loose group of other soldiers heading roughly the same direction, because traveling alone is suicide. Bandits target solo travelers, and ironically many bandits are former soldiers who found that robbing people was easier than farming after they returned from war. Your body is wrecked. The visible injuries, the scar on your scalp, the crooked arm, the burn scar on your shoulder that pulled tight and shiny as it healed are bad enough. But the invisible damage is worse. Your feet never fully recovered from the trench rot. You walk with a slight limp now, and every step sends little jolts of pain through damaged nerves. Your lungs feel wrong, probably from the respiratory infection you caught in week 9 of the siege. You cough frequently, sometimes bringing up phlegm streaked with blood. which is concerning but not concerning enough to do anything about, because what would you do anyway? You're also thinner than you've ever been. The semi-starvation of the siege camp, combined with multiple bouts of dysentery, has left you gaunt and weak. Your clothes hang loose on a frame that's lost maybe 30 pounds of muscle and fat. You look like a famine victim, which isn't far from the truth. Your hair is falling out in patches from malnutrition. Your teeth are loose in your gums. You're maybe 26 years old and you look 50. The psychological damage is harder to quantify but impossible to ignore. You have nightmares every single night. Not vague anxiety dreams, but specific, vivid replays of trauma. Climbing ladders while rocks fall, watching the amputation surgeries, hearing the screams of burning men. You wake up gasping, sometimes screaming, and the other soldiers you're traveling with are annoyed because your nightmares wake them up too. They have their own nightmares, of course, but that doesn't make them sympathetic to yours. You're hypervigilant in a way that's exhausting. Every unexpected sound makes you flinch. You can't relax, can't let your guard down, constantly scanning for threats even though you're not in combat anymore. Your hands shake slightly all the time now, a fine tremor that makes detailed work difficult. This is what we'd now call PTSD. But in medieval times it's just soldier's heart, or battle fatigue, or not named at all, just an understood reality that men who've seen combat come back changed. There's also shame, though you're not entirely sure what you're ashamed of. You survived, which should feel like an accomplishment, but mostly you feel guilty about all the people who didn't survive. You remember specific faces: the man who died with his own billhook through his chest, the soldier whose arm was amputated, the guy who got hit with boiling water, and you wonder why you lived when they didn't. Survivor's guilt is another concept that won't be named for centuries, but the feeling is ancient and universal. And then there's the moral injury, the damage to your sense of self from the things you were willing to do. You were ready to participate in looting, in ransom taking, in all the brutal logistics of medieval warfare. You didn't actually do those things because the city surrendered first, but you know you would have if given the chance. You've learned something about yourself that you can't unlearn, that under sufficient pressure, your ethics are flexible, that you're capable of viewing other humans as resources to be exploited. This knowledge sits in your gut like a stone. The journey home takes 3 weeks of hard walking. You sleep rough most nights, in ditches or abandoned buildings or just on the side of the road. You eat whatever you can afford with your limited pay. Hard bread, cheese when available, occasionally a thin soup at an inn if you're willing to spend precious coins. The diet is barely enough to keep you moving, certainly not enough to rebuild your wasted body. You're attacked once, sort of. 3 young men with knives approach your group on a forest road, sizing you up as potential robbery victims. But you're traveling with 8 other former soldiers, all of whom still have weapons and the hollow-eyed look of men who've seen real violence. The would-be bandits take one look at your group and decide to look for easier targets. You continue walking, and nobody even discusses what just happened. It's just another moment in a journey full of small threats. When you finally reach your home village, you almost don't recognize it. Not because it's changed, but because you have. The buildings look smaller than you remember. The people look soft and naive, going about their daily lives completely unaware of what warfare actually looks like. You feel simultaneously superior to them who've experienced things they can't imagine and envious of their ignorance. Your family's reaction to your return is complicated. They're glad you survived, obviously, but they're also disturbed by the changes in you. You're skeletal and scarred. You wake up screaming from nightmares. You flinch at sudden movements. You have a 1,000-yard stare that makes people uncomfortable. Your mother tries to feed you, to fatten you up, but your stomach can't handle rich food anymore after months of camp rations. You vomit up the first real meal she makes you. Your father asks about the campaign, wanting to hear war stories, and you find that you can't talk about it. Not one can't. The words stick in your throat. How do you explain what it was like? The cold, the fear, the disease, the casual brutality? The words exist, but they can't convey the experience. So you say vague things like, "It was hard," and "we didn't take the city," and your father looks disappointed, like he was expecting heroic tales instead of this broken person who came back in your body. The village treats you differently now. You're a veteran, which carries a certain respect, but also wariness. People know that soldiers come back changed, often violent, frequently unable to readjust to civilian life. They give you space, speak carefully around you, watch you with a mix of honor and fear. Children are told to stay away from you. Women avoid being alone with you. You've become a dangerous element in the community, tolerated but not truly welcomed. You try to work, to take up your old life, but your body can't do it anymore. The farm labor that was routine before the campaign is now impossibly hard. Your weakened arms can't swing a scythe for hours. Your damaged lungs can't handle heavy exertion. Your psychological state makes focus difficult. You start tasks and space out, losing track of what you were doing. Your hands shake too much for detailed work. You're functionally disabled, though that's not a term anyone uses. The nightmares continue. Month after month, you relive the siege in your sleep. Your family moves you to a separate sleeping area because your screaming disturbs everyone. You lie awake most nights, afraid to sleep, watching darkness gradually shift to dawn. Exhaustion becomes your permanent state. You're never truly rested, never at peace. You notice yourself becoming isolated. Social situations are difficult because you can't relate to people's concerns anymore. Someone complaining about a bad harvest or a dispute with a neighbor feels absurdly trivial compared to what you've experienced. You can't muster appropriate reactions. You sit in silence while others talk, feeling disconnected, like you're watching through glass. Your old friends drift away, uncomfortable with this changed version of you. There's anger too, sudden and disproportionate. Small frustrations trigger explosive rage that scares you as much as it scares others. You punch a wall and break your hand over something minor, a spilled cup, a perceived slight. The violence you witnessed has become part of you, and it leaks out in these eruptions that leave you ashamed and more isolated. Medieval society has no therapy, no anger management, no tools for dealing with this except social ostracism and hoping you don't hurt anyone. Historians still argue whether medieval soldiers experienced PTSD at rates similar to modern soldiers, or whether the different cultural context provided better coping mechanisms. The evidence suggests that yes, medieval veterans absolutely suffered psychological trauma, though it was understood differently and treated not at all. You're living proof that the human nervous system responds to extreme stress the same way across centuries, with nightmares, hypervigilance, emotional numbing, and all the other symptoms that won't be formally recognized as a coherent syndrome until the 20th century. Some veterans turn to drink, trying to numb the memories and the pain. Alcohol is relatively available in medieval society, and public drunkenness is tolerated to a degree. You see the appeal, those few hours of intoxication where the memories recede and the anxiety quiets, but you also see where that path leads. There's a former soldier 2 villages over who drinks himself into oblivion daily, who's lost everything, who'll probably die in a ditch somewhere. You're trying to avoid that fate, but some days it feels inevitable. The physical pain is constant. Your poorly healed arm aches. Your feet hurt. Your shoulder, where the oil burn scarred, pulls uncomfortably when you move. Your lungs feel wrong. You have digestive issues from the dysentery that never fully resolved. Your body is a catalog of damage that will never completely heal, and medieval medicine has nothing to offer you. Pain is just part of life now, a baseline condition you're expected to endure without complaint. You can't form new relationships. The idea of courting someone, of being intimate, of allowing another person to see your damaged body and broken minutes unthinkable. You're alone in a fundamental way that has nothing to do with physical proximity. Even surrounded by family and community, you're isolated inside experiences that can't be shared or understood. Months turn into years. The acute trauma symptoms moderate slightly, the nightmares become less frequent, the hypervigilance less constant, but they never disappear. You're managing your damage rather than healing from it. You find ways to be minimally functional, taking on simple jobs that don't require sustained physical effort, avoiding situations that trigger your anxiety, structuring your life around your limitations. You're 30 years old now, but you look and feel 50. Your body is worn out, your mind is scarred, and you've got decades of life potentially ahead of you that you'll spend as a damaged veteran, tolerated by society but never truly reintegrated. This is your reward for military service, survival, but at a cost that makes you question whether survival was worth it. Sometimes you see other veterans, recognize each other by the hollow eyes and the scars and the way you both flinch at sudden sounds. There's a moment of connection, an acknowledgement that you share something most people will never understand. But you don't talk about it. What would you say? The experience is simultaneously the most significant thing that ever happened to you and something you'd give anything to forget. The really cruel part is that there's another war brewing. You hear news from travelers. A different lord has a different grievance. Armies are being raised. Soldiers are needed. And despite everything, despite the trauma, the injuries, the knowledge of what you'll experience, you feel a small pull of temptation. Because at least in the army you were around people who understood. At least in combat there was a clarity of purpose. However horrible, at least in that nightmare you fit in. Whereas here in peaceful civilian life you're forever an outsider, marked by experiences that set you apart. You don't go, of course. You've learned that lesson. But the fact that you even consider it tells you how damaged you are, how thoroughly the war changed you into something that can never fully return to normal life. This is the aftermath that doesn't make it into the songs and stories. No glory, no honor, just existence marked by pain and memory. You survived your day, your months, realign a medieval battlefield trench. But survival and living are not the same thing, and you'll spend the rest of your life learning the difference between them. The sun sets on another day in your village. People are settling in for the evening, lighting fires, gathering with families. You sit alone, watching darkness come, and allow yourself to feel the full weight of what you've lost. Not just your health, though that's gone. Not just your peace of mind, though that's shattered. But something more fundamental, your place in the world, your sense of self, your capacity for normal human joy. The war took more than it gave. and you'll carry that deficit until you die. Which, given your damaged body and the medieval life expectancy for people in your condition, probably won't be as long as you fear. The stars come out, same stars that watched over the siege camp, and you're suddenly back there in memory cold, scared, in pain, waiting for dawn and another assault. You shake your head, trying to clear the flashback, and slowly you come back to the present. Your village, your home, your life, such as it is. Tomorrow will be the same, and the day after, and all the days stretching ahead until there are no more days. This is what surviving warfare actually means. Not a triumphant return, but a slow, painful continuation where the war never fully ends because you carry it inside you forever. And with that knowledge, with your scars and your pain and your broken mind, you finally understand the ultimate truth of medieval warfare. The battle might end, but the battlefield lives on inside every survivor, permanent and inescapable, until death finally offers the peace that life no longer can. The night settles in fully now, deep and quiet. Your breathing slows, matching the gentle rhythm of evening. The weight of these stories begins to lift, floating away like smoke from dying embers. You're safe in your own bed, far removed from muddy trenches and siege lines. Your body is whole, your mind at rest. The past fades, and the present holds you softly. Let the images blur and dissolve. Let the tension drain from your shoulders, your jaw, your hands. There's nothing to hold on to now, nothing to carry, just the steady pull of sleep, gentle and irresistible, drawing you down into darkness that's peaceful rather than troubled. The medieval battlefield is centuries gone, turned to fields and forests where nothing remains but earth and time. And you, here and now, are drifting into dreams where history cannot follow. Rest comes easy when you stop resisting it. So stop resisting. Breathe deep, breathe slow, and let everything go.